Welcome back to Aim in Practice podcast, where I have the immense pleasure of sitting down with a diverse array of practitioners, experts, and authors. Together, we delve into their unique journeys and insights, exploring this multifaceted world of wellness. And of course, life as a practitioner, I'm your host, Jess Reynolds, and today you're going to hear a conversation with Greg, also known as Greg the Hydrogen Man. Now, Greg is a molecular hydrogen therapy specialist. He's a researcher and host of the popular YouTube channel Uprising 144K. After struggling with tumors, autoimmune issues, and a heart condition, Greg began his own healing journey and discovered hydrogen therapy. Today, we're going to explore this fascinating world of hydrogen therapy and its potential impacts on health and wellness.
That I actually know how it works. The only reason that I don't actually share it is because in detail is because every single time I've done this, and this has already happened to me so many times, even my protocol that I created this protocol. Well, what happens? Somebody steals it.
Throughout our discussion, Greg shares how hydrogen therapy serves as an incredible tool for practitioners, potentially enhancing other modalities. We delve into the specifics of how hydrogen can be used to promote healing and relaxation, and Greg offers insights into the proper methods of hydrogen application. He also discusses how hydrogen therapy helped him reverse his own health challenges after 4 years of intense study and implementation.
Do you just want to change your diet for a week or a month until your issues are resolved and then you get off the diet, the healthy diet, and go back to junk food? No.
Greg underscores the importance of consistency and long-term commitment, especially in therapeutic practices such as hydrogen therapy. He shares fascinating case studies and personal experiences that highlight the potential benefits of this approach, including its ability to help protect against things like EMF radiation and its topical applications for skin problems.
Data that eating those type of foods actually helps your pH of your blood, which actually helps with the proper levels of oxygenating your blood. And hydrogen appears to kind of function, that same way.
Now, Greg is super passionate about the potential of hydrogen therapy and its applications in wellness. And I can tell you, after having this conversation, I certainly dug deep into the research myself, and it's quite compelling. He offers his perspective on how holistic practices, including, of course, hydrogen therapy, can help us find that sense of balance and health, and how it can become part of our daily practice. All right, with that, let's jump into the conversation. Well, Greg the Hydrogen Man, I am very much looking forward to this conversation. I always like to start with a bit of a story, because what ended up happening with this interaction, this conversation we're going to have, is I was out and about on a little mini holiday, and I got back and I see this email from you, this idea of like being a guest on the podcast, and I see Greg the Hydrogen Man, and I'm like, Hydrogen Man, what's this all about? And at the time, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to get back to Greg as soon as I've got time. I'm just landing, getting home. And then a really good, close friend of mine, who's also a practitioner, she sends me this text message, and she says, hey, so listen, I'm thinking about starting to have hydrogen water. What do you think about this? And I'm like, wait a second, isn't that strange? Like, I have only periodically heard of hydrogen therapies, like in the last decade of practice. Very rarely. And all of a sudden, I get you into my sphere, and then my friend Andrea, she gets into my sphere. And then, of course, I'm on the Instagram, and a reel pops up of old boy Dr. Andrew Huberman talking about hydrogen water. And I'm like, okay, I got to pay attention. So I immediately reached back out to you, and I'm really, really excited to learn about hydrogen therapy. The research I have done has been very enlightening and insightful and quite exciting. So thank you very much for being a guest, and I'm excited to really dig in.
Absolutely. No, I'm excited too. I love when people are excited about it and truly want to learn, because those are the people that I prefer to speak with. So thanks for having me on, and you throw any question you'd like up my way, and I'll share what I know.
Well, I'd really like to start with your journey, right? Like I've been in this integrative and alternative medicine world for a long time, and I've seen a lot of things come and go, a lot of trends. And when it comes to hydrogen therapy, as I was looking into it, it did kind of come out of left field, right? Not the most popular therapy out there. And from my understanding of what you do, it's like your thing. I mean, you're Greg the Hydrogen Man, right? So tell me about your journey into this world of hydrogen therapy, and how exposure to it really changed your understanding of wellness and healing.
It was absolutely wild, because I wasn't really into the whole health thing. And ironically, I worked in the medical field for like 2 decades. But I really wasn't into health, though I've worked with numerous doctors, numerous specialists. I know what goes on behind the scenes. And so I know the shenanigans that happen. And then eventually I myself got sick. And then that's when things really went south for me because, I got extremely sick. I knew what the medical establishment had to offer, which scared me because I was thinking, oh no, here we go. And of course, I did approach Western style medicine. It was not good. It didn't really help me with a lot of the stuff that I was dealing with, and I was suffering a great deal. I mean, I had issues I had tumors in my body. I had a heart condition that I needed open heart surgery for. I had autoimmune condition with a lot of gut issues. My liver and my kidneys were really not at their best. And I had such bad inflammation all over my body to the point where I literally couldn't walk. And I was in so much pain for very long periods of time. And probably the lowest point was when I just couldn't walk. So I was on the couch one time and I grabbed the remote control to try to just watch some TV. And my joints hurt so bad I couldn't use the remote. And that's
Whoa.
how much pain I was in and a lot of inflammation. And so just had a lot of issues. I remember even feeling a growth on my eyeball that had begun. So there was like a lump on my eyeball. And I mean, I was really bad. My health was in the absolute toilet. And I was told even by my cardiologist that I probably wouldn't make it to 10 more years. And that was just because of my heart. My other conditions, it was looking like I wasn't going to be around very long. And I'm a big time critical thinker. I'm all about good data and I know how to research and I know how to do this. The problem is for me is it has to be, if it's not in my heart, like if I don't want it bad enough, I will not find the best way to do something. But if it's in my heart, I do things that most people just can't. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but when something is important to me, I find things that nobody else finds. And so I started reading a lot of scientific data to try to improve my health. And that's when I stumbled upon hydrogen. Now, with hydrogen, I actually thought it was a scam at first because I was reading the data and it was too good to be true. I mean, it was really too good to be true. And I thought this can't possibly be real. So I continued to read data, but I wasn't really implementing it into my life. My health was, I did it for almost 4 years reading data, and my health was I mean, it was going from bad to worse. And I just became desperate. And not to get too spiritual on your show or anything, but when we're at a low point, what do? I started to pray, and I was praying and I was like, and I wasn't asking for God. I wasn't like, hey, heal me right now. That's not what I was asking for. I was asking for guidance, for help, that I may find something or understand how the human body really works, that I may be able to share this with others, because I just knew that if it would work for me, it'd probably work for a lot of other people. And immediately I was already thinking about others even at that time. And so that's what I did. And I don't know how or why exactly it happened, but somehow something began to change in me and I began to have a greater aptitude for the way that the human body works. Everything became easier to me. And I started realizing that I couldn't trust, and this is not a knock on podcasts, clearly, but I couldn't trust everything being said on a podcast, because you'd have one podcast where somebody says you should drink, alkaline water. Then you have a different one that says, no, you should be drinking spring water. Then you got another podcast, no, you should be drinking distilled water. And then everybody was disagreeing on just water, let alone, I won't even get into diets. So everybody disagrees,
Totally.
eat nothing but meat, no, eat nothing but fruit, no, do this. And everybody has so many opinions. And when you're trying to, get better and heal yourself, you don't know what direction to go. And you end up with a ton of different products, a ton of different supplements, and it becomes very frustrating. And so I made a decision that I was going to look at scientific evidence, like really good data. I know that there's bad data out there due to who's funding the studies. So I had to really, really do a lot of homework. And it really started showing me, I started finding the best data in Japan. I wasn't specifically going to Japan looking for data, but that's where I was finding the good stuff. And of course, that's where I found out about hydrogen. And I was trying a lot of things, not getting tons of improvement, maybe a little bit here and there, but nothing dramatic. And I was still suffering. And when I finally just almost 4 years of researching hydrogen, I'm like, okay, I think I'm just going to give this a whirl, because not only does it look really legitimate, the data looks really good. It was medically approved, so it's medically approved in Japan. So this is something that, and they fought it to not be medically approved, the establishment, but there was overwhelming evidence. You just couldn't deny it, so it got approved. And then the question began to me, and this is a question that nobody really asks. I'm the guy who's really brought it to the forefront, which is, okay, we know hydrogen's great for us. Now remember, we are talking about a specific hydrogen. We're talking about molecular hydrogen. We're not talking about something that they call Brown's gas. We're not talking about deuterium. We're talking about molecular hydrogen. And that's important because that's what the data shows is working. And that's why it's important. I'm going off data, right? So with that being said, looking at the data, looking at molecular hydrogen, and then I want to get my hands on it. So that's where actually the research became even more difficult, because at the time, back then, there really wasn't a lot of info and it was hard. And basically, when you want to get your hands on it, you can't just go to the corner drugstore and buy some molecular hydrogen. You just can't do that. And the one thing that nobody talks about, everybody wants to talk about how amazing hydrogen is. And this is, in my opinion, why everybody's getting duped. And that includes a lot of practitioners, a lot of doctors are being duped in the world of hydrogen, in my opinion, because of the forces that are promoting things that I don't think are actually the right way to do it, like hydrogen pills. We were talking about hydrogen pills. I am not a fan at all. I've seen what's in them in lab tests. I won't go into that, but I'm just saying that what I saw, I am definitely not putting that in my body. And this goes for a lot of cheap products. Like here, I can show you one of them. Like these are becoming really popular, these little bottles. I'm not a fan of these at all. Obviously, they're made in China, and sometimes they send the parts to other places of the world, whether it's Canada or Taiwan or whatever, to put them together so they can claim that they're not made in China. That's how much people don't want stuff from China. So they try to, do these little loopholes. But I'm not a fan of these at all. Mostly because I don't like plated metals. This has a plated metal. I don't like the membranes that are being used because I've seen lab reports of what's in the membrane. I don't like the way they directly electrolyze the water because it creates impurities. All these little details that nobody talks about, things that nobody actually even knows about. So people just promote them thinking that they're great because they make some hydrogen. So the research that I was doing really started going into, okay, we know hydrogen's great, but how do we make it properly that has proper levels of it, creating a proper protocol? I mean, these are things that there were no answers to these questions back when I started. Hence the reason I got so deep in it that I'm the guy who created actually the best protocol so far. My protocol was actually lab tested and proven that I was right, that my protocol works better than any other method ever done to date. And there's a lot of things that I've come up with and shared. And that's why I'm known as the hydrogen man, because,
Right.
hydrogen, and it's not just for health. There's a lot of things that we can do with hydrogen, but most people are interested in health or even improving performance. I think it's going to change the world of certain combat sports like boxing. The head is not designed to be hit the way that it does. Football, MMA fighting, how people get concussions, how people get TBI. I've worked with people with traumatic brain injury, Alzheimer's, dementia. I work with people with diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, arthritis, autoimmune issues, like celiac disease, IBS, a lot of gut issues, even eye conditions. I can't believe the stuff that I've seen in regards to macular degeneration, glaucoma. I mean, this stuff it's incredible. I mean, that's why it's so amazing. And so I became, I believe, more of an expert in how to make it. Although I know about hydrogen and how amazing it is, I don't hyper focus on it because I already know it's good for us. I already know it's
Right.
good. I want to know how to apply it, because that's the stuff I couldn't find, is how to apply it and the best way to make it. And that was the information that was actually even harder than the scientific data that is out there. So hopefully that answers your question. I feel like I went a little on a rant there.
No, it did. It actually laid pretty good groundwork for where we could take this conversation in different directions we could go. And I really, really appreciate the start of the journey. One thing I've come to understand. So I've been teaching for years as well, acupuncturist, massage therapist, right? And I find that people make their way into the practitioner world by a fairly limited number of pathways. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different individual stories, but one of the most common is I was super duper sick and I was desperate, and whatever system wasn't working for me. So I took my health into my own hands. I did my own thing. And lo and behold, I discovered this really amazing thing. And I really admire stories like that and I like them. Part of the reason I enjoy them so much is because the individuals such as yourself who do come from this background come from a place of like, this really helped me and I want it to help other people too, as opposed to, I make a hydrogen machine and I like making money.
Yep,
It's
yep.
like two different approaches. So I certainly appreciate the background and how you've got a firsthand experience of what it's like to be, from what it sounds like, devastatingly and likely terminally ill, and recovering
Yeah.
through I'm sure not exclusively, but maybe exclusively, but certainly in part the use of hydrogen therapy. So no, thank you. I appreciate the story, and I wonder if we could maybe take a little step back and kind of go through that's some of that, like what exactly is hydrogen therapy? Like, explain simply the fundamental concepts behind how hydrogen therapy actually creates a beneficial change?
Well, first, let's talk about what hydrogen is, because a lot of people don't even really understand that. And it's really simple. It's a gas. So it's a gas like oxygen. And a lot of the similarities that I've discovered about oxygen are important to apply with hydrogen, and yet nobody's done that and seems to understand it. Even when I talk about things like medical grade oxygen versus like welding oxygen and what the
Hmm.
differences are, same thing with hydrogen. What's the difference between what I would call medical grade hydrogen versus non-medical grade? And then now what you're asking is potentially, if I'm understanding correctly, like what exactly is it doing in the body? Is that what you're kind of asking?
Yeah, like you were sick, you started hydrogen therapy, and you seemed to feel as though and find that whatever illnesses were within you started to dissipate and become healed. Like what 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 does hydrogen actually do to facilitate that transformation within the body?
So the first thing I'll tell you is that the full mechanism of how hydrogen works is not actually known. We don't
Okay.
totally know exactly how it works because it throws a lot of curveballs at us. What we do know is, let's say you take somebody with arthritis and you see inflammatory markers drop after using hydrogen. So, okay, we know that it's doing it, we just don't know how it's doing it.
Hmm.
Though we do know some things. I mean, we know that hydrogen appears to function it is an anti-inflammatory. I mean, that's something that it appears to do. We also know that hydrogen works as a selective antioxidant. This is important because it's not your normal antioxidant. People hear antioxidant, they're like, oh, it's an antioxidant. This is what people don't understand, and I wish I had a chart for you. Are you aware that antioxidants actually come in different sizes?
Hmm.
So a lot of people don't know that. So if you were to look at
Yeah.
vitamin E, maybe it was this size, and you look at vitamin C or glutathione, things of this nature. So different types of antioxidants. And if you had something like CoQ10 is really big. And everybody's all like, for a while they're like, oh, CoQ10. It's like, in my opinion, I'm like, forget CoQ10, no need. It's a really big molecule. And when you need to penetrate like the mitochondria, or you need to get stuff into the brain, wherever, you need something that can basically go into every nick and cranny of the body. And that's what hydrogen appears to do. I mean, I always like to say, look, I don't give any medical advice. I don't like to make any medical claims. So I always like to throw that out there. Um, and I won't go into why I have to do that, but I'll just say I have to protect myself. This has already been an
Totally.
issue in my life, and it's so frustrating when you want to bring the truth to people. But if we compare CoQ10 and hydrogen, hydrogen's like tiny. It's like a grain of sand compared to like a big rock. And why is that important? Because the way that it's so tiny, it gets into every nick and cranny of the body, including even into the mitochondria. In fact, that was the
Hmm.
very first research on mitochondrial dysfunction in regards to, the benefits of hydrogen. So,
Yeah.
so it works as a selective antioxidant. Now that's very different than something like vitamin C. Vitamin C is an antioxidant, but it's indiscriminate. It just goes in and starts, doing its little thing. Hydrogen does it selectively. That's something that really impressed me. It's one of the reasons I named my YouTube channel Uprising 144K, was actually because of the way that hydrogen worked. And I actually felt like it worked, like, dare I say, like the Holy Spirit or something like supernatural, because
Hmm.
it's doing things selectively. It'll do one thing for one person and not for another. I mean, there was research where people have, for example, too much glutathione level, or I'm sorry, well, yes, with glutathione, but also with cholesterol, but maybe glutathione one was a better example. Too much or too little. They get on hydrogen, the one with too little comes up, the one with too much goes down, and it brings the body into homeostasis, which is important. We need,
Hmm.
everything is literally about balance. You don't want too much water, it'll kill you. But you don't want too little water, then you're dehydrated. You know, everything is about balance in life and in this body. And that's the one thing that I believe hydrogen does, is it brings balance in a way that you can't even begin to imagine, because even our bodies make hydrogen. So as you age, just like stomach acids, as you age, you actually make less and less stomach acids. And it's the same thing with hydrogen. You make less and less, and you need to get those levels to proper levels in order for the body to run right. It also appears to work as like a signaling molecule. The way that it protects DNA is the way that hydrogen is so protective, or appears to be. You can see it on my video number 8. I show cells that are exposed to radiation with or without hydrogen, and like chemotherapy and stuff like that. The protectiveness is so dramatic. Like probably one of my, and you can see it on video number 8 that I have. If you want to see how the blood moves, watch my video 68. I showed a lab test, and and they use the exact equipment that I like to use because it's the best. And they use that on this lab test. And I remember having a doctor literally called me and said, hey, I saw that video number 68. And I was like, yeah. And they said, I'd like to talk to you about it. And I was like, okay. And they said, what you're literally showing there is impossible. They said, it's just not possible what you're showing. I think that you were being dishonest with the viewers. Where did you get this footage? And I said, well, I got it from a lab in Japan, and I'm like 99.999% sure that this thing is legitimate. And this doctor was like, look, give me all the details of the study. I'm going to buy one of those devices. I'm going to take it to my lab. I'm going to repeat the test. And if the results don't come back the same, are you willing to do a video and say that you were wrong on sharing this information? I said, absolutely. Because this is what I want. I want to bring good information. That's the whole purpose of my channel. It's not to promote specific products. It's not about the money. It's about showing what helped me because, well, for one, I feel like I made a prayer and I made a promise. And that promise was that if I found my way, I would share with others. That's really what my promise was. And the other thing is I feel that it's important that we love one another, just like scripture says, love your neighbor as yourself. I'm not talking about religion. I'm just saying that I believe in loving one another and helping one another. It fills my soul with joy. Life is short. We should all live to our best potential as far as our health and happiness, because that makes the world a better place. I mean, that's just my views on the whole thing. And so this doctor did the whole test. And when she got back to me, she said, I cannot believe it. The results came back exactly the same. You are sharing something that's legitimate. And she was so blown away. She was always looking for good stuff. Her mother was in her 90s, could barely stand up for like 2 minutes. I mean, she was weak. She was tired. She was a mess. And she used to bring her all sorts of supplements and different things. And her daughter would just take whatever because her daughter is a doctor. So the mother would just take whatever. And then she started bringing her hydrogen. And I believe it was within 3 to 4 months. Usually the biggest results you see in a 3 to 6 month or 3 to 8 month window. Her mother was up and walking around for hours. And I still remember this story because this doctor told me, she said, I want to tell you what my mother told me. And she said, the results have been dramatic. I've never seen anything work like this. This is the best I've ever seen of anything I've ever done. And her mother said, honey, I never ask you what you're giving me. I always trust you. You're a doctor. I know you have the best intentions for me to get well. But I have to ask, whatever you're bringing me, and it just looks like water to me. I just don't know what it is, but it just looks like water. Whatever this is the one. This is the thing that has changed. I can feel the difference dramatically. What is it? And she's like, it's hydrogen, Mom. She's like, hydrogen? Like, what are we talking about here? So it was pretty wild. And I got massive amounts of stories because I've been doing this for like a decade. And there's a lot of stories like that are literally unbelievable. I mean, they're literally hard to believe. This stuff to me does the impossible. So anyway, hopefully that answers your question.
I appreciate that. And I mean, I don't want to assume, but I'm getting the sense just through our brief interaction so far that you live a spiritual life. You have it sounds like a pretty strong foundational belief system. And I love it. I really, really appreciate it. And as you're describing the function of hydrogen, it's so funny because you describe it the same way I describe the medicine I practice, which is Chinese medicine, right? Is we know very conclusively that there is a outcome. It is a repeatable outcome that it facilitates health and well-being in a variety of different ways across the board. We know that is the case. So that's inarguable. And yet we're kind of stuck in the same position, right? It's like, what's the mechanism? Well, in Chinese medicine, we're like, it's qi. We got this word we use. It's qi's doing thing. So it's such a cool thing I love hearing stories like that, even though it's a little bit frustrating because so many people want that mechanism of action in order to really get on board. Yeah.
Let me just say this, not to interrupt you. I believe that I actually know how it works. The only reason that I don't actually share it is because in detail is because every single time I've done this, and this has already happened to me so many times, even my protocol that I created this protocol. Well, what happens? Somebody steals it. So it was stolen within 2 months of me putting it online, and somebody else is taking credit for my work.
Oh, brutal.
So if I tell the mechanism of how this thing is actually functioning, then I know they're going to steal it, and I already know who it is. I already know who's taken my information, and multiple people in the hydrogen industry watch my channel for the information, just to take the info and pawn it off as their own. And that's why I'm very hesitant about sharing the details. But I will tell you that I do share how to make it, how to use it. So I will share that information. But the full mechanism I will potentially someday, because not that I want to have a big head or an ego. I think it's important to know who came up with this information, because then you know who to listen to in the future in regards to future stuff about hydrogen, which, by the way, I do have future information already that the world doesn't know about yet. And it
Nice,
is
nice.
big. It's going to change the world of
That's so
health,
cool.
fitness, even spirituality. So, yes,
Hmm.
because I
I,
actually
I
call it a
I appreciate
spiritual.
that.
I actually call it a
As-
spiritual molecule. It's the ascension molecule. It literally
hmm.
ascends. That's what hydrogen does.
I mean, that's like literally what it does. Hmm.
Exactly.
Super cool. I enjoy those types of sort of not, I don't know, mental experiments or ways of perceiving things. The ability to sort of hold both simultaneously. It's like have the discussion of here's how it seems to be working physiologically, here's what we seem to understand about the science behind it, and great. And that speaks to one type of individual. But then there's this whole other group of people who are like, I don't know what you're talking about. Anti who now? Dude, tell me something that hits my soul, right? And then saying something like
Yes.
it's a spirit molecule. It's like you get to talk to multiple different individuals depending on how they enjoy having information come in. So that's super cool.
I could give you a little spiritual stuff if you want.
Oh man, jump in. I'm in
All
big
right.
time.
So let's see here. What are stars made of?
I'm gonna go with gases.
They're pretty much made of hydrogen.
Okay.
So they're made of hydrogen and helium. Helium is a form of hydrogen. Kind of like ozone is a form of oxygen, it's just O3 rather than O2.
Mm-hmm.
So you got helium and hydrogen, and that's pretty much what stars are made of. You know, that's the majority of what they're made of, well over 90%. So here's the interesting part. The stars, now not to get too spiritual, but what did the wise men follow to find someone like Jesus, for
Right.
example?
Yes.
They
Uh-huh.
followed a
Yeah.
star. We look to the star constellations, you know, and they're all over scattered. I mean, the majority of what's in outer space is actually made of hydrogen, you know, and the
Mm-hmm.
way that this stuff, and it's literally spiritual. If you look at a lot of spiritual scriptures, not just quote unquote the Bible, but and the Dead Sea Scrolls, but even things in Asian culture like the Tao Te Ching and things of this nature in Buddhism, there's a lot of talk about water. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we're entering what we call the age of Aquarius. See, this is what's coming is the knowledge of hydrogen. I'm just giving it. That's what's coming, and it's already begun. And it began a long time
Beautiful.
ago. I mean, it started with someone like me. You know, this started a long time ago. And basically, water is made of H2O. So it's H2, which is molecular hydrogen, O, which is oxygen. Now, when you separate those two, oxygen
Mm-hmm.
actually drops to the ground. Kind of like if you take a balloon and blow into it, it just drops to the ground. But hydrogen ascends.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
so it's actually a correlation between what I call life and death because hydrogen is a life molecule. It's an antioxidant where oxygen's an oxidant. And it's actually, oxygen is death because oxygen oxidizes, it kills things. But
Mm-hmm.
if you do it in a balanced way and do it harmoniously, life is about the balance of life and death. Ultimately, we just need to have that balance. These days, I think we have way too much imbalance in regards to that. And that's actually part of how hydrogen works in the body because the Japanese saw all these medical conditions. I wish I could show it to you because it was just tons of them. Like, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, they had all these medical conditions where they had shown hydrogen to be effective for these different medical conditions. Next to each condition, they showed the pharmaceutical drug that would be used for such a condition. So then you had a huge list of pharmaceutical drugs. Then next to that list, you'd have all these additional pharmaceutical drugs that would also be used for those conditions or more pharmaceutical drugs for the side effects of those medicines. So the list was massive of these drugs, and the list of medical conditions was pretty big. And then they had hydrogen, just one thing. And the reason that they had it was because they found that this one thing was effective for all these conditions. And the question was, and this was millions of dollars, lots of research, a lot of smart people behind this in Japan. They're like, how is it possible that one thing does all this and eliminates all these medications? How is that possible? And what they
Mm-hmm.
ultimately discovered is that most medical conditions, I think it's about 98% from I remember on the data, are actually caused by one thing, and that's oxidative stress, you know,
Oxidative
free
stress.
radical
Yeah.
damage. And if you
Mm-hmm.
have too much in your liver, then you'll have certain liver conditions. If you have too much, you know, free radical damage, oxidative stress in the kidneys, kidney issues, and so on and so forth. And what hydrogen appears to do is this oxidative stress is a form of oxygen. So hydrogen has this affinity for it and it goes to it and it appears to just neutralize it, turn it to water, flush out of the body, and then the inflammation comes down and, you know, and everything starts working properly. And it does a lot of other things, but that's kind of what the Japanese scientists basically, their conclusion that they came to. And so That's kind of the more simple answer, as I might say, but it's such a beautiful molecule and a lot of life. That's why video 68, the way it moves the blood. Oh, you should see the way the blood starts to move. It's what some people think is impossible. And
Yeah.
movement, proper blood flow is very important for health. And
Hmm.
even the way that it's shown to increase core body temperature, this is an interesting one. A lot of people don't know that the majority of cancer patients, well over 90%, I believe the number's like 98%, of all cancer patients have a lower core body temperature than they're supposed to have. And this was discovered in Japan also. And then I saw another test. It was a thermoimaging in a clinic in Japan where they use hydrogen also. And they show that hydrogen increases core body temperature to healthy levels. And they proved it. I mean, they showed it in the thermoimaging. I released a video on that also. And so, again, life molecule, when a baby has a lot of life in it and it's warm, right? Little kids run around their diapers and when it's cold.
Hmm.
And then you see older people and they're cold and they always want to have all these
Yeah.
clothes on. So babies had a lot of life in them, a lot of blood flow, a lot of warmth, the heat. And so I think all those things are correlated and important.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in TCM we say that as yang diminishes, as that heat energy diminishes, that's a sign of aging. Like children are all yang, right? They're all that fiery zest, that life, and then as we go through life, it depletes little by little, and all of those things. So that's interesting. One might I don't know if this is too far in my interpretation, but might say that hydrogen is a yang molecule. And it's interesting as I say that and reflect on your discussion of how it interacts with oxygen, turning into water. Water, of course, is very yin substance. So, like that transformation process that we always talk about in Taoism and TCM. That's super cool. I love it. I
And
love how you can, go ahead. Yeah.
I'll say, and oxygen plays a role, because I mean,
Yeah.
we know we use oxygen medically, but
Mm-hmm.
using oxygen regularly is not a good idea. I mean, we know about the way that it affects red blood cells, for example, and the
Yeah.
body starts adapting to too much oxygen. So we have to be careful on how we use it. But oxygen dehydrates us. So that's why when people are inhaling, even medical grade oxygen, they get dry, you know. So oxygen kind of dries you out and even potentially burns, like when you're using like hydrogen peroxide. I mean, hydrogen peroxide is actually not much to do with hydrogen. It's an additional oxygen molecule. It's H2O2. And so, and it can burn. I mean, it can burn you, and
Mm-hmm.
oxygen can burn, where hydrogen is more hydrating rather than dehydrating. Instead of an oxidant, it's an antioxidant. And it doesn't burn you. In fact, I've just recently read a study. I mean, there's some stuff that is getting really wild, like they were using it on burn victims. And the results were so incredible. And I literally know somebody in my own family who burned themselves recently, and the moment they burned themselves, she was like, oh no, I just burned myself really bad on the stove. And immediately I said, let's try this out. Got the hydrogen water, put her hand in the hydrogen water, let it sit there for quite a while. Next day she was fine. I couldn't believe it. I literally couldn't
Wow.
believe it in one day. And so,
Mhm.
in the way that it appears to accelerate aging, or I'm sorry, not accelerate aging, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
accelerate healing,
Decelerate. Yeah.
and it's actually anti-aging.
Mm.
In Japan, they did a really cool, and it's really amazing for the skin. So many skin conditions. I got all sorts of before and after pictures. But one of the interesting things about the anti-aging aspect, I'll throw a little data here to you. They did a test on a guy over there where they and made hydrogen water properly, safely, cleanly. They didn't use hydrogen pills for this study, just an FYI,
Mm-hmm.
or any machine that uses lye, sodium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide. I'm not into those. But anyway, the point is they did a study where they tested his blood. Now in Japan, they have a way apparently of they test the blood and they can literally tell you roughly what age you are by looking at your blood. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And then what they did is they got him on medical grade hydrogen for a year, and he didn't change anything in his lifestyle. They said just live the way that you always live. They tested his blood a year later, and his blood was 5 years younger.
Mm.
And I myself went through a test and actually released it again on my channel. There was a gentleman who wanted to run me through a gamut of tests. He goes, I want to see how healthy the hydrogen man is for a guy who's doing your protocols. Because some people doubt what I do also. And and ever since I started doing my protocols, because I create my stuff, I've been getting blood work regularly to make sure that I've overcome all nutritional deficiencies. That's really important part of my protocol. And I just wanted to see how I've been doing and seeing that what I'm doing is working. And so two stories actually, because one, when I did the blood work, I couldn't believe this. I actually had a doctor call me and I was worried because in the medical field, again, I have knowledge because I worked in there for 2 decades. Usually when they call you, it's a bad thing. You know, Usually if you don't get a phone call, they tell you, hey, if you don't get a call, it's all good. If you get a phone call, it's because there's something wrong. I get a phone call from the doctor for my latest blood work, and I was worried. I'm like, whoa, what's going on? They're like, well, we want to talk to you about some stuff that we're seeing in the blood. And I'm like, oh my God, what is it? Like, I really was scared. And she said, to be quite honest, I've been doing this for a long time, decades. She said, I've never seen blood like yours. She said, it's unbelievable. And I'm calling because I want to know what you're doing. I want to
Mm.
actually try to apply this not only toward my patients, but for my own daughter. That's when doctors call me, by the way. It's always when it's their own family, usually, though this was the only doctor who actually contacted me for their patients, but it's usually for themselves or their own family. And
Mm.
she just couldn't believe the way my nutrients were, all my markers. It was just, it blew her mind, and that's why she had called me. And reverting back to, now I'm trying to remember, going off on a tangent there. We were talking, let's say, I talked about the anti-aging blood
Mm-hmm.
work, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember, and that was just the hydrogen water. My
Yeah.
protocol is a little different. I actually like to use the hydrogen water and the hydrogen gas in a specific way. And so that was how I
Mm.
created the protocol. And that was actually they've done 2 studies so far on that method, and it is shown to be more effective than just the gas or just the water alone. So the
Mm.
combination
Interesting.
appears to be
Mm.
ideal. And not to change the subject, but have you do you know where a lot of this knowledge came from? Like, are you aware that nature does this? Have you ever heard of a place called Lourdes, France, or they also call it Lourdes, France?
No, no, tell me about it.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so this is where a lot of this originated from. There's a place in Lourdes, France, where there's a spring of water, and they say that it's a holy site. It's like a holy place. People go there and drink the water, claim miraculous healings. They did actually, I mean, there were so many documented cases. They literally started sending scientists to test the water. They're like, there's got to be something. This is too miraculous. All the scientists said there's nothing miraculous. It's just H2O. It's just water, until the Japanese got a hold of it. This is why I love the Japanese. They're so good at the details. And ultimately, they did discover that that water had high levels of molecular hydrogen. So it appears that
Mm.
nature actually does this. And of all things, yeah, holy site. I don't know. Does that matter? Does it not matter? I don't know. But they say it's basically kind of like holy water. And that's when they started doing a lot of tests in Japan on animals. If I wish I had some of the footage for you, you should see, like, they have a box with a bunch of mice on both sides. Some get the hydrogen water, some don't. They expose them to radiations and chemotherapies to see how they react. And I mean, it's night and day. You can see it. The average person can see the difference clearly. The ones with the hydrogen are moving around. Their body temperatures are better. They're healthier. They're pooping all over the place. The ones that didn't get the hydrogen are all huddled together. They're very cold. They're not having healthy bowel movements. They're not energized. They're not doing their thing. And so it's just so remarkable. I really think this is like almost a journey between, yes, the physical health and the science, and the spiritual kind of ends up kind of coming into play in this. And I think it's so amazing, and I do believe it's going to change the world.
I think the time is ripe for it. Something that I've been noticing in my practice, as well as just observing sort of the general ethos that's happening in, I guess, the wellness circles that I'd run in. So maybe it's a pocket, maybe it's a bubble, I don't know. But there certainly seems to be an increasing draw for people to say, like, okay, the physical medicine part, awesome, super cool, super important, but I kind of get it. Like, Lord knows we're nowhere near fully understanding nutrition, but we get the basics. Don't eat junk, eat real food, mostly plants, right? Like, the basics
Yeah,
are kind of laid down. So my experience has been a lot more people are saying, like, okay, well, there's still something missing, and it's this integration. And what I appreciate about what you just said is usually that integration is spoken as mind body. It's like, okay, we got the body, we got the mind. Here's how they integrate. But I really value and appreciate how you said sort of body spirit. You bring in this sort of spiritual, like metaphysical aspect, which I totally agree with. Ignoring that part to our own detriment is one of the worst things that I think we can do. So hearing that there's a physical modality that, in your experience and belief, almost insists upon bringing in some sort of a metaphysical or spiritual understanding is really beautiful.
absolutely. And I'm grabbing a book here to share because the aspect, since I've been using hydrogen, I actually don't normally talk about this, because I stick to the data. I don't want to turn people off. I want people to get better,
No.
no matter what their
Yeah.
belief system is, right? But I definitely think there's a spiritual component. And as I've been using hydrogen more, dare I say, this is wild, I know this sounds weird, I almost feel like it's doing something to me. because
Mhm.
my brain, the way that I'm able to compute things and understand things, I mean, I'm having things come to me that never came to me before. Like I have visions of devices, like to build.
Mhm.
Like I want to build a device that I believe will change the world of medicine, health, and potentially even be extremely anti-aging. When I say extreme, I'm talking like a guy walks in at 80, walks out at 20 from this device. I know that's a bold claim,
Mhm.
and I'm not making any claim. I'm just saying that this is supposedly
Yeah.
what the equipment would do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just think that hydrogen again has this effect, and it has this actually very spiritual effect on us, and it has had a profound effect on me. And I don't know if you've ever heard of this. Have you ever heard of the hidden messages in water?
Yeah. Yeah. I have. Yeah.
All right. And who was the guy who discovered? Do you remember?
Mitsi. Mitsiaki. Yeah. What's his
He's,
name?
he's a Japanese guy, Masaru Emoto.
Yeah. Sorry, Moto.
Okay,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
back to the Japanese, and people made fun of this guy for this. Eventually, he
Hmm.
proved that it
Oh,
was
he
legit.
got a lot of heat for that. Yeah.
Got a lot of heat, and this is what I love about the Japanese. They do think outside the box a lot of times. It just depends on what we're looking at. But here's the part that nobody discovered, and I really don't like to say this on camera, but I'm going to say it because I believe I'm the guy who discovered it. Because nobody, but once I get it out there, people are going to start claiming the same thing. Clearly, water has memory. We know that water has
Hmm.
memory. This is something that he proved that it's got memory,
Yep.
right? I don't think that the memory within water is actually the water.
Uh huh.
I think it's in the hydrogen in the water. Because
Hmm.
hydrogen, in my opinion, was probably the very first thing created. In fact, think of the ancient scriptures. Let there be light. Stars, right? Our
Hmm.
sun. What is that? It's hydrogen. It's the very first thing on the periodic table. And I believe that, of course, there's memory in water. It holds the memories. I believe that the memories of the universe are in hydrogen. And that's why
That's so cool.
as I consume it and I use it, it's affecting me. I mean, I'm not kidding.
Hmm.
The things that I come up with now, it's so boggling. But the purity is something that you want. This is the part that I don't like that they're doing to us in this world. The food is not that pure, right? You buy some crackers, you buy something, there's a bunch of garbage in it, and that affects the temple. Now that goes into the spiritual side again, where
Hmm.
the ancient scriptures say the body's a temple of God, right? Whatever, not belief systems. I'm just saying that's what it says in some ancient scripture. And I do believe that it's a temple of the spirit, right? I definitely
Yeah.
believe this. And the more that I've changed my life, because I was really sick, the more that I've purified the cleanest water. And by the way, I show people how to clean water properly. I have the lab work here to prove it because not all water filters are created equal. And I use water as a carrier for the hydrogen if I want the cleanest water. Second, I want the cleanest hydrogen. So I don't use the hydrogen pills. I don't use the cheap hydrogen bottles from China. I want the highest grade, medical grade hydrogen. Everything's about purity because as I consume the really good food, right? Organic, no pesticide, I do the best I can. Can you be perfect? No, but I do the best I can, which on average is probably better than the majority of people because I'll share that test that they did on me in a second because that's the one that I didn't finish my conversation on that.
Right.
But
Right.
basically, you begin to purify the body and things begin to change.
Hmm.
I have had spiritual experiences since I've
Uh,
been doing this. And the hydrogen, this is literally what it actually does. Have you ever heard of ghost vessels? A lot of people are not
hmm.
familiar with this term. Okay, so you have,
Hmm.
awesome. A lot of even medical practitioners don't know about it, even though it's a medical term. But these ghost vessels, areas in your body that no longer get blood, it's like a ghost town,
Yeah.
right? Hydrogen appears to actually open up the ghost vessels again, which means that you're bringing in blood to the areas. And you remember what blood is. I mean, blood is carrying, oxygen, hydrogen, nutrients to your tissues. And so if you begin to open up these areas again and bring these nutrients, whether it's back to the brain, I've worked with people, not just with TBI, but these dementia, people with dementia and Alzheimer's. I got a video. It was an unbelievable story of a woman whose mother has dementia. She didn't even recognize her own daughter anymore. She saw one of my videos, of course. She got her on the hydrogen. She took before and after pictures as she was using it, throughout the months. It was so unreal. She messaged me and she emailed me and said, look, is this stuff supposed to be doing this? Because it's mind blowing. My mother now can get up and walk. She recognizes me. I literally can't believe what I'm witnessing. How can the world not know about this? How is there no medical practitioners that really know about this? And so it's just been absolutely unbelievable.
Hmm.
And as I said, it's the life molecule. So life, I mean, when something's dying, like your brain's dying, your body's dying, you get weak, you get dementia, things don't work right. What else would fix you? Well, if we're showing that this one thing appears to be good for so many things, it just only makes sense that it'd be the molecule of all life, the very
Hmm.
first thing ever created. So anyway, it's exciting, it's spiritual,
Hmm.
it's physical, it's everything. It encompasses all parts of life.
I resonate with what you're saying to a certain extent as well. What I mean, certain extent is personal experience, and I've experimented a lot with different diets and nutritional protocols, and so that's one thing. But I also live a fairly rich spiritual life, and I've also gone to the jungle for ayahuasca journeys and done all the different psychedelic voyages, and tried a lot of things to sort of contact this realm of spiritual and perhaps even reside there for longer. And
Yes.
what I've always found really interesting is there was this one period in my life which this dietary protocol I was on. It was like unbelievably strict. So for me, it just wasn't sustainable.
Right.
But I did almost a year of this crazy strict diet. And what was so fascinating is there was moments where I'm just walking in the grass and I'm like, this isn't real, my vision was different. I couldn't even feel the ground beneath me. It really felt like I was on some sort of substance. And I would see
Absolutely.
people and they'd be talking with me, and I'd almost like see the emotional, and you know what I mean? Like I don't want to wax poetic too terribly much, but what I'm getting at is when I took care of the vessel, when my sole focus
Yes.
was getting the body as healthy as possible, there was zero effort required to contact the spiritual, right? So in those experiences, I can certainly resonate. If you're saying that hydrogen does such amazing things to facilitate health and wellness within the body, it makes complete sense that one would have easier access into these more spiritual experiences, which I think is super duper cool. I'm wondering though,
Absolutely. Good.
if we can for just a moment, is
Yes.
I get excited about things like this, as I'm sure you can tell, and I really appreciate the knowledge that you're bringing to the table. But I want to balance it a little bit with what are the downsides? What are the skeptical things? What are the things to be scared of? Like I want a listener to come away from this thinking, I have a well balanced perspective, not just listening to these two guys talk about how amazing hydrogen is, but come away with sort of the balanced perspective of like, okay, what else do I need to be careful of? What sort of skepticism should I move into this with? That type of stuff.
And for people who don't know me, because clearly, the audience probably doesn't know me, I'm actually a huge skeptic. I mean, when I read the first stuff on hydrogen, I thought it was a scam. And I didn't even try it for almost 4 years. And I'm like that for a lot of things. I do deep research, and I do that because there's so many shenanigans out there. There's always
Yeah.
something, and people are always making these
So
claims,
much.
and
Yeah.
it's very frustrating. So I'm very hardcore on getting it right. And that's why I
Hmm.
take my
Hmm.
time and it takes years. When it comes to hydrogen, I would say the biggest downsides are one, just making it the wrong way. I mean, that is
Yeah.
probably one of the biggest downsides, whether the cheap materials, the pills we talked about. I mean, the chemicals that they use sometimes. I mean, why would sodium hydroxide, I mean, we're talking about lye, which is this is the main ingredient in Drano. I mean, people use that to make hydrogen. It's unbelievably stupid, in my opinion, and yet they do it. Some of the most popular machines out there use those chemicals. Or cheap, I had to learn a lot about the science of metals.
Hmm.
Metallurgy is very complex, and I had to learn a lot about it in order to understand hydrogen. You never want to use a metal like stainless steel. Stainless steel is not the right metal for hydrogen. People do it all the time again. Plated metals, the science of metals has to be really precise. Hence the reason the machine I recommend is it's a Japanese machine, and the metal is second to none. The technology that it took, literally nobody in the world uses that metal because it's just too complex, very expensive. And the Japanese are masterful of metals. I mean, look at their samurai swords. I mean, they're masterful with that kind of stuff. The other downside that I would say with hydrogen that you have to be cautious with is if you're on specific medications or have certain conditions. So I'll give you some examples because I've seen this before. People with high blood pressure, for example. So let's say somebody is taking a medicine for their high blood pressure to control their blood pressure, which is great. They should control their blood pressure. You don't want to have a stroke or anything. And so you try to control the blood pressure. But when you start introducing hydrogen and you're taking a pill, which in my opinion, the hydrogen is making the pill even more effective because
Hmm.
hydrogen just is like that. It just makes everything more efficient. And in my opinion, it's also potentially resolving the underlying issue. So what ends up happening is your blood pressure goes too low. And
Right.
if you're not monitoring your blood pressure, then all of a sudden you get dizzy, something happens. I've had this happen with people. So if you're going to do hydrogen, you want to make sure that you're monitoring your blood pressure if it's an issue for you, so that as it starts going too low, potentially you talk to your doctor, right? Talk to your
Hmm.
physicians or whatever, and they might back you off on the medicine. And then eventually, what I've seen with a lot of people is they back it off until eventually they're off the medicine, which is kind of the goal. You don't want to be on pharmaceuticals, in my opinion, due to the negative side effects. So that's one. Same thing goes for diabetes. I've seen hydrogen do amazing things with diabetes. It's actually pretty incredible because I've seen it function almost like insulin, where it helps control and regulate blood glucose. I worked with a woman. She calls herself now the hydrogen girl because she just fell in love with hydrogen. She tried the hydrogen pills, these little bottles like the one I showed you. She tried all this stuff. It wasn't working. She was going to give up on it. She found my channel and she implemented hydrogen correctly, and it did work for her. And she was starting to control her blood glucose to the levels where she was going out without medicine for long periods of time. And she's type 1, which is technically, according to her doctor, impossible. So her doctor was like, wait, this is impossible. He tracked her for almost 6 months. He wanted to track everything she was doing. By the time they were done and he looked at it, he said, look, what you're showing me is literally impossible. There's nobody in the world that can do it. But yes, I'm seeing you do it. He said, what are you doing? So he finally came out with the question, what exactly are you doing? And where did you learn how to do this? And she's like, well, there's this guy on YouTube. He's called the Hydrogen Man, and he showed me how to do the hydrogen. And the guy's like, what? There's no guy on YouTube showing you how to do this. There's no way. Because he said, if there was, he said, you realize this is worthy of a Nobel Prize. He's like, this is crazy what I'm witnessing here. And so, and I've had these stories for years. This has been going on for quite a while. And so with diabetes, it's important because if you're on medication to control blood glucose and you introduce something that is helping the underlying issue and makes these medicines work potentially better, you're going to get too low of blood sugar. So you need to really watch and really figure out, and then if they taper you off of medicine, so that's important. And then if you have like weak kidneys, you don't want to be pounding a ton of water and straining your kidneys. So I have protocols depending on what people are, potentially going through. But those are the biggest things to watch out for, is just making it wrong, which means you're basically using it wrong, and monitoring what you're going through so that you don't put yourself in a bad situation. Those are the biggest downsides that I can think of.
I mean, that makes sense, right? Anytime, when I'm working with clients, if I'm putting them on a new protocol, I pretty much insist, like, if you're on any type of medication, cool, let's work together. Let's try and find a holistic, natural approach to solving this. But simultaneously, like, you got to work with your doctor. You got to make sure you're constantly checking in, because the interactions, they can be dangerous. And it's not that it sounds like the hydrogen is causing the problem. It's just we're cautious with interactions with any medications. That seems like a fair caution. Now, when it comes to consuming hydrogen, so far what we've talked a lot about is consuming hydrogenated water or molecularized water, molecularized hydrogen within water, right? But I also understand that there's a way to consume it via respiration, right? You can breathe in hydrogen gas. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
What are the benefits, pros and cons? Like, why would one choose to breathe in what you've referred to as medical grade hydrogen gas versus consuming the hydrogenated water?
So basically, honestly, I think both are important. But if I had to pick one, hands down, it's the hydrogen water. That's foundational. Hydration is foundational.
Yeah.
If you were to know what was in our water, and again, I got lab reports here, it's scary. It's darn right scary what's in our water, and probably one of the biggest exposures to microplastics, which is a whole other, shenanigan out there that's happening in the world of health. And so hydrogen water would really be probably the first thing. Now, both are important though I wouldn't get a device that just makes inhalation. That would be kind of silly. So that's why the equipment, that I personally use does both. It makes the water, and at a high level, by the way. I could go into all the details. It gets a little technical, but it makes all hydrogen water is not created equal. I hope people understand that. So hydrogen water, the machine that I like, makes both the water, but it also makes the gas inhalation and really high purity. So the fact that it does both is actually really important, because you could do one or the other, but why not do both from one machine if that's possible, right?
Right.
So that's the first thing. The water, and we're going to learn more and more about this, but the water will do things that the gas doesn't do, and the gas apparently does some things that the water doesn't do. So they both, and yet they have a lot of similarities as far as what they do. Okay. That's always funny when you get a sentence like that. And so
every time
I know. And so one of the things that happens with the water is it actually appears to help the body produce ghrelin. Now, ghrelin being a precursor to, yes, very interesting. And I believe I actually know why, but again, I haven't released it because if I release it, I've seen the pattern. It always gets stolen. So I've stopped doing that. but basically it appears to produce ghrelin, which is really something that typically happens when you're fasting.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I believe I can explain all this, but I won't go into those details, where the hydrogen gas doesn't appear to do that.
Mm.
So there's
Right.
one difference right there. And I think it's important. I mean, it's a precursor to HGH, human growth hormone.
Hmm.
And so all these things are kind of important. Now, the protocol that I created was one, I like to drink the hydrogen water on an empty stomach. Now, to clarify for people, because I know a lot of people ask about like the Kangen machines and these machines that make alkaline water.
Yeah. Yeah.
In my opinion, and this is my opinion is based on data, but just so people understand, those machines are actually not very good for you. Because, and I'll explain why, because people are like, wait a second, there's science that supports that it's good for you. I'll tell you where they went wrong. There's a difference between short-term data and long-term data. The Kangen did have scientific evidence in short-term data that appeared to be that it was good for you. Now, the reason is because they thought it was the alkaline water. They thought it was the pH of the water. Turns out that's not what it was. Turns out that the Kangen machine inadvertently made some hydrogen. It all was hydrogen the whole time, and they were doing it wrong because they were making the water alkaline, which hydrogen doesn't. So when you make hydrogen properly, like pure medical grade molecular hydrogen, it's actually pH neutral. So when you manipulate pH, it already shows you're making hydrogen the wrong way. In fact, the hydrogen pills, when you drop them in water, they actually make the water super acidic. Not the way
Hmm.
you want to be making hydrogen, okay? Hydrogen is pH neutral when made correctly. The equipment I use, again, pH neutral. That's the proper way to do it. And so that's something that's really important to know. Hydrogen is also odorless, colorless, and tasteless, and is pH neutral. So these are important factors because, again, to compare them to like hydrogen pills. Hydrogen pills are not colorless. The water turns all gray like metal. It's not tasteless. In fact, the water tastes like metal when you're done with it. It's not odorless because it actually stinks. When you put it in the water, you start smelling what it produces. And it's not pH neutral. So it literally hits
Hmm.
none of the things that it should as far as making it medical grade. And yet you have doctors. This is why I go off data and don't listen to a lot of people, is because I need to give them proper data, not just with some random guy sitting out there who, like you said, is selling a product, or it's always about the money. I'm sure we know that by now. Um, so anyway, not sure if that really sheds any light, but that's what the water, quote
Yeah.
unquote, one of the things that it does. And the hydrogen gas, again, is a little different. So my protocol, you drink this is what I discovered, actually. This is my protocol. Part of it, you drink the water in an empty stomach. So that's one of the first things. I don't like to put water in with all the food. You can do that, but I found it more effective to drink hydrogen water empty stomach 20 to 30 minutes before a meal. Get that in
Hmm.
you, get it all primed and ready to roll. The hydrogen gas, I discovered, works better after you drink the hydrogen water. So you drink the
Hmm.
hydrogen water first, then you do the gas. And that's what the latest two studies proved, that my method was correct.
Interesting.
And so that's why it's nice to have a machine that can actually do both.
So a lot of, in fact, I would say pretty much all of my listeners are practitioners of some sort or another. They're clinicians. They're working with clients on a regular basis. And for a fair few of them, prescribing any type of nutritional intervention, any type of herbal supplement, saying consume anything is not allowed, right? Body workers, by and large, where I live, it's like you can't prescribe any type of thing a person puts in their body, with one exception. What they are allowed to say is drink plenty of water, right?
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say, wait a second. Okay, so you
They're
got
allowed
what?
to say you can drink water. So I'm curious now. Now I want to make sure that anybody who listens to this episode and kind of gets fired up by this idea, and they're like, I'm in, and they start consuming hydrogen water, and they're working with their clients. What type of like safety precautions does one have to be like acutely aware of when suggesting hydrogen water? Be it a massage therapist, an osteopath, a naturopath, I don't care. But if anybody is going to say to one of their clients, hey, I think hydrogen water would be really helpful for you, what do they have to be careful of so they don't get into any legal trouble?
Well, the legal trouble, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, although I will say, hey, don't make any claims,
Yeah.
things of that nature. And if they're not an MD, make sure that they talk to their doctor about, whatever it is they choose to do. But like I told you actually before, it's just really important that first that it's made properly, because I've
Yeah.
literally
Okay.
spoken with doctors, and I'm not kidding you. There's been doctors who were using, in this case, they were using Brown's gas devices, which are not really where the science is. And they use, again, that chemical. They use lye to make Brown's gas, and I don't like it. And this particular physician noticed that his patients were coming into his office using it, and they were getting sick in the long term.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually something I didn't finish on the Kangen machine, but basically the Kangen, I said, the
Right.
short term. The long term data actually shows that it disrupts stomach acids because of the alkaline, the
Mm.
pH, and you don't
Right.
want to mess with your
Makes
stomach
sense.
acids. You want them to be at proper levels. They have a function. I won't go into all that right now because I'll revert back to the other question, which was that this doctor was noticing that his patients were getting sicker. Now, instead of trying to dig more and understand why, he took the device, he put it in the closet, and he never shared it with his patients anymore. Eventually, he did find out because he found me. And then I explained to him, he was like, that makes perfect sense. I've worked with so many people who have used hydrogen the wrong way, so many
Mm-hmm.
people. And I have seen a lot of detrimental things. It's actually been very, very sad for me because I know how amazing hydrogen is, but when done incorrectly, it's a problem. And I believe that
Right.
we're not going to find out this for decades. It's going to take a while till they realize that it's a bad idea. Kind of like
Mm-hmm.
glyphosate took forever, or different things
Mm-hmm.
that they eventually realize, like PFAS, stuff like that, that are really bad for us. And so
Mm-hmm.
anyway, so the biggest thing would be that, and then all the things that I mentioned before. Do they have kidney issues? Are they on high blood pressure
Right.
medicine? Are they on cholesterol medication? Are they diabetic? Those seem to be the real big boys as far as, that's why you have to monitor, if you're going to be using the hydrogen. And I've seen people I've seen where they use the hydrogen. There was a woman, actually, she had really terrible gut conditions. I've worked with people with stuff that they literally tell me, my doctor could never solve it. They spent a fortune. This woman spent about $180,000 throughout many years, numerous doctors, numerous different products. Nothing could fix her celiac disease. I believe it was either celiac or Crohn's. I can't remember. It was a gut issue. I've worked with so many people with gut issues. And so she had tried all these things. Nothing worked for her. She got on the hydrogen and her issues went away. I'm just going to say it. And she was
Mm.
so blown away. She actually contacted me. She's like, oh my God, you changed my life. This is so amazing. She became very overconfident. She started eating all sorts of things that she shouldn't. She said she just went
Yeah.
crazy. I mean, the pizzas and the pastas. And she said, I just went all out. And she said, when I used to eat that food, she said, I used to be in so much pain. She said, it was worse than having a baby. I was like, whoa, that's a lot of pain. She said, I was scared. I could not eat food like this. She said, all of a sudden with this hydrogen stuff, she goes, I can eat it. And it's unbelievable. So she went hog wild. She did all that. She got kind of overconfident, started laying off the hydrogen. Now think
Mm-hmm.
about that for a second. Let's say you take hydrogen. Let's say you fix your blood pressure issue. You get a little confident. You start not using it as much as you should. All of a sudden it starts creeping back, right? So you really have to monitor. In her case, she started getting the pain again and everything went downhill for her all over again. And then she contacted me about it. She stopped those foods again. She got back on a hydrogen regimen because my hydrogen protocol, like I live this way every day. I mean, I always drink
Mm-hmm.
my water first thing in the morning. I drink it in the middle of the day. I drink it in the evening. I do my hydrogen gas inhalation. For me, it's just part of my life now. The good news is that with the proper equipment and proper protocol, it's actually one of the easiest things I've ever done. Changing my diet and things like that was actually much more difficult. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
so brutal. And I'm with you on that. I've tried so many myself. But now I just have more of a, it's a healthy diet, but it's easier to follow. Once in a while, I have little cheat days, stuff like that. It doesn't bother me one bit. And it's the hydrogen and clean water that is like foundational
Mm-hmm.
to my protocol. And so that's the thing that I would tell people is, don't get, once you start getting better, this actually happened with my dad. He had arthritis. He had a lot of different issues, including glaucoma. And of course, we tried the hydrogen and whatnot. And it's been amazing for him. It changed his life. But when he would lay off the hydrogen and he would go on long vacations, like if he'd go with my mother somewhere for a month or two, or they would do all these things, suddenly his symptoms would start creeping back. He's like, my joints are starting to hurt or something. Or he didn't take care of his hydrogen machine. So sometimes he wouldn't care for his hydrogen machine and it was making less hydrogen because he wasn't caring for it properly. And so then he started getting back on the horse again, and then eventually his condition went away all over again. So just little things
Mm-hmm.
like that you'd want to watch out for, in my opinion.
So it sounds like, as I hear you describe this, that it's one of those things that you one should maintain and keep going. You start the hydrogen therapy and you continually maintain it. Are there any cases in which an individual would only need it for a short period of time? You know, that they would have an issue, whatever it is, they would consume the hydrogen and it would fix the issue well enough that they wouldn't need to stay on a regular routine of hydrogen?
I mean, I think it's possible, but this is the way that I usually convey hydrogen to people. Do you just want to change your diet for a week or a month until your issues are resolved and then you get off the diet, the healthy diet, and go back to junk food? No.
Mhm.
Do you only want to drink clean water for a month until your issues are resolved and then you go back to drinking tap water? No, do you want to get your nutrients but only get them for about a month? I mean, even deficiencies, like we could talk about, like, for example, scurvy. Scurvy
Hmm.
is a deficiency in vitamin C, right? So it's like, oh, okay, do we get your vitamin C levels right? Scurvy goes away. Does that mean we can stop taking vitamin C? So I mean, there's a lot of things that our body unfortunately needs on a daily basis. We need to get good sleep. We need proper
Yeah.
hydration. And to me, hydrogen and oxygen too. I mean, we need to breathe in oxygen. Do I only need it for a day? I need oxygen every day,
Yeah.
So hydrogen, unfortunately, is just kind of like that. And that's another reason, again, the device that I like is reliable. See, a lot of these, there's a lot of reliability problems. I've seen that a lot with these bottles too. They break. And the machine that I have is like the Toyota of hydrogen machines. It's extremely reliable. It just keeps working. I love that company. I love what they've done. The story of the guy who actually was in charge of creating the device, such a beautiful story. His own daughter was sick. And so
Hmm.
that's why he didn't make it in China. That's why he didn't cut any corners. That's why it's made in Japan. That's the reason it became the number one machine in Japan, because it's the best. And,
Hmm.
actual
Hmm.
medical professionals that use hydrogen in their practice. Now, in Japan, it's very different than America. There's guys here to use it. They don't know what they're doing. We're talking about true hydrogen specialists in Japan. And one of them is a neurosurgeon. And so he knows his stuff. And he says, there's only one device that I'll use, and there's only one device that I'll recommend to my patients. And it has nothing to do with money. And I even learned from him that he said the purity is so important because hydrogen goes past the blood-brain barrier. So it's extremely important that it's pure and made correctly. And the device that he uses is called the Lourdes Hydrofix Premium from holyhydrogen.com, which is the same one I use, that Japanese machine. And so it is really important that it's done, properly.
Hmm. Hmm. Now I'm curious about somebody if somebody's interested in just trying it out, right? Like, do they have
Mm-hmm.
to go out and buy the machine? Is there any like easy entry point for people who are curious but maybe not ready to commit to buying one of the machines?
Well, that's a tough one. And I actually was just going to make a
Yeah.
video about this today because people always want to do that. And it's unfortunate. It's like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good example. Basically, you would have to either know somebody, who
Hmm.
has a device where you could go try. Like if you're a practitioner and you had it in your office, people could try, give them a glass, whatever, something like that. The problem with hydrogen is the same thing. It's like, well, again, like, can I eat healthy for just one day and see if it works? It's like, you can eat
Yeah, it's
healthy for
worthwhile.
one day. Are you really going to feel the difference? Maybe a little bit. But it's really something that it's like clean water too. Hey, can I try a glass of clean water for one day? And so that's what's tough. The good news is that we have massive amount of data and science to show that this stuff, I mean, it is medically approved. It's medically approved for a
Hmm.
reason. I have live blood analysis, so you can actually see what's going on with the blood. I got the thermal imaging. You can really see that one. They did inhalation from the hydrofix. And so things of this nature. Now, if people want something cheap, I mean, I could show you this. This is actually, I'm pretty impressed with this product. Coriolis Versicolor. I don't know if you've ever seen or heard of this.
Hmm. Okay.
Now, the reason I was going to make a video was because people always want something cheap, so they want something
Yeah.
cheap that really, really works. And that's why they tend to go for the hydrogen pills, right? These are not hydrogen pills. And these actually work better, in my opinion, for your health than hydrogen pills. I'm actually really impressed with this. And again, from Japan, the Japanese made an interesting discovery. And if people want to look at this, I think the website is hman dot, what is it called? petclub247.com. I don't know. If people
Yeah, we'll
want to
put it
check
in
them out.
the show notes.
But
Yeah.
so if people want to go with something cheaper, there's a few things that I've discovered. Not a lot, but there's a few things that I discovered. But I'm really a big believer on, and I mean, here I got the lab test, third party lab
Right.
test in regards to what's in our water, and I'm talking every single one of these are
Oh,
chemicals and pages. I mean, I got pages, look at of chemicals and crap in our
yeah.
water, and how to actually clean the water. I don't think people understand how normal water filters work, and porous filters are not the best. That's not how you
Hmm.
purify water to the highest degree. So anyway, you know, it's hard for me to answer that question because you're not going to see true results for probably 3 to 6 to 8 months, depending on what you're going through. And even my father's glaucoma was an interesting story because he used hydrogen for a year and he gets his eyes checked every year. And when they checked his eyes after a year, I was really excited, thinking, "Oh, is his glaucoma going to be gone?" And the doctor said, "Everything's normal. You still have your glaucoma. Keep taking your medicine," which is like these drops in his eyes. And so I was like, "Oh, okay. I guess maybe the hydrogen needs more time." Second year, He went in and get his eyes checked. Same thing. You still got glaucoma. Use the drops. I gave up at that time. I thought, okay, so
Hmm.
hydrogen's not going to work for this, but it worked for his arthritis. I've seen it do all sorts of stuff with blood pressure, cholesterol, pre-diabetes. I saw a lot of things that it did even for my father that was amazing. But the glaucoma one, it hadn't worked. By the third year, I'd already given up on it. I get a phone call from my father. He's at the eye doctor. He's like, "You're not going to believe this." I'm like, "Dad, I know it doesn't work. You're at the eye doctor. I get it." He's like, "No, they said I just tested negative for glaucoma." And he had had glaucoma for over 30 years. So this is the
Wow.
important part that I've noticed is that hydrogen's doing its thing. But it took 3 years for his
Yeah.
eye condition to supposedly, just disappear. Now,
Hmm.
even his eye doctor didn't believe the results. This is how crazy it was. He said, "There's no way that your glaucoma's gone. We've never seen anybody getting older, especially at his age, almost being 80. Like, we've never seen somebody at your age where the glaucoma goes away. Okay, we've never seen anything like this ever. Come back, redo the test in 2 weeks, because we know there's something wrong. We know you got glaucoma.
Hmm.
You've been coming to us for over three
Obviously.
decades.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure." He goes in again, comes out negative. And they're like, "No,
Hmm.
this can't be right. Come back again." Comes back again, negative. And then they said, "Okay, this is ridiculous. We're going to get another specialist." Like, they got one of the top specialists on the West Coast. And the appointment took almost half a year to get because they wanted to test his eyes differently. And they did this whole gamut of testing with him. And in the end, the doctor was like, "It's unbelievable, but your glaucoma is basically gone. And I don't even know what to think of it." So they said, "What we're going to have you do is lower your medicine." He used to put 3 drops in each eye. They said, "Just use the minimum. Just put 1 drop, because the last thing I want is for something to happen and you to go blind." They just didn't know what to do. They'd never seen it before.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's why hydrogen, the good thing is we have data on it, and it can just take time. And so people who just want to
Hmm.
try it, the best thing I can tell people too is your body does produce it. And so, a healthy lifestyle, healthy gut can actually help you produce a little more. But I mean, still, as you
Yeah.
get older, I mean, the science shows that you make less and less hydrogen as you age. So it's a tough question to answer. I wish there was a simpler answer, but maybe they'll
No,
go to your
I
clinic,
appreciate the answer. Yeah.
or if they're near me, I'll share some water or somebody near you or something.
I want to be mindful and respectful of your time, but if you don't mind, I still have a few more questions, and
Oh,
hopefully,
go for
hopefully, I can. Yeah, cool. Well, the one that came to mind is as you're describing this, I'm thinking, of course, many of my patients who would benefit from this protocol that you're defining. But one in particular is a chronic emphysema case. Have you ever worked with anybody who's got emphysema?
it. Yes, I worked with a lot of people who've had lung conditions,
Hmm.
asthma, emphysema. In fact, here's an interesting story. I'll throw an interesting one at you. This particular guy was smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day for 50 years. It's crazy. And his oxygen saturation levels in his blood were really low. It was bad. And so he gets on the oxygen. And as a lot of practitioners know, you get on oxygen, and if you start using regularly, you ain't getting off of it. I mean, it is not a good thing to get used to. And so it reached the point where he said he literally couldn't be off of oxygen for even a few minutes. Like, he had to be on
Hmm.
it all the time. And he was frustrated about that. He didn't like it anyway. He found me, found the hydrogen protocol, the device I use, all that stuff. He tried a few products. It didn't really work for him though. But then I always tell people, look, this is not the same as other hydrogen products. I always try to explain this to people. He took the plunge. He's like, "I'm going to do it. I really want to change my life." So he started using the hydrogen. Lo and behold, his oxygen saturation started getting better, because of the way that hydrogen appears to affect pH of the blood, which is potential hydrogen, right? And so he started using it, and it got better. Now he can go without his oxygen machine. Up to date, he can go about 3 hours without it, which for him, he said, was a big leap. That took, I'm trying to remember, I believe it took about 4 months for him to get to that level,
Hmm.
or 4.5 months. And I've seen this before. There was another guy who actually, same thing, he had trouble with oxygen saturation, which, it's funny because people think, oh, okay, problems with oxygen, let's give you more oxygen. Don't think that way, because we already have oxygen in our atmosphere. I mean, we're breathing roughly 20 something odd percent oxygen in our atmospheric pressure, depending on where you're at in the world, but whatever. It actually has more to do with how your body functions. I mean, you brought up fruits and vegetables or plant food, and I'm a big plant eater. I'm big on the veggies. I make these amazing smoothies, whatever. Not try to toot my own horn, but they're pretty cool. People want to watch my videos there and see how I do it. But basically, we we know there's data that eating those type of foods actually helps your pH of your blood, which actually helps with the proper levels of oxygenating your blood. And hydrogen appears to kind of function, that same way. And so that's what I think is kind of, making the difference. But yes, I've seen a lot of people, and also inflammation. So
Mm-hmm.
inflammation, it being an anti-inflammatory. There was an interesting study, I don't know if you know about it, for people who had asthma, and they literally took the best pharmaceutical drugs in the industry, and they compared it just to some dietary changes. And the big thing, over 80% of the people never taking a pharmaceutical basically got rid of their issues, and that was eliminating dairy. Dairy seemed to be the key component that was causing a lot of the mucus and the inflammation and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. And God knows what they're giving these poor animals these days in the milk, and then
Yeah.
you ingest it. So I'm not a huge fan of dairy either. Though I love cheese and stuff, but I stay away from a lot of that stuff these days. But yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of people use the hydrogen for proper oxygenation actually,
Cool.
and it's been unbelievable. It's blown my mind.
So this device. Thank you. I appreciate you enlightening me on that. The device you're talking about that you've mentioned throughout this conversation. I certainly appreciate the necessity of having a high quality device that's actually going to go through the hydrogen production process in a safe and effective way. So you mentioned the name of it very briefly. It's from a company called Holy Hydrogen, right?
Yeah, that's their
That's the one you
website.
recommend?
What a name too. I
Yeah,
love that.
okay.
But yeah,
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
holyhydrogen.com.
And in our correspondence back and forth, you mentioned that individuals who are interested in that device, there's a discount or something that they can get if they're interested in it.
Yeah, I mean, they can use I don't know if you have a discount code, but they can use mine too if they
Yeah.
want it. Obviously, it really doesn't matter to me. But
Hmm.
it is important if people want a discount. I mean, I would. And the code is
Yeah.
uprising144K, the same as my YouTube
Yeah.
channel.
Cool. Yeah. All right. All right. Okay. So we'll make sure that that is in the show notes as well, so they have access to that. And the last question that I want to ask you, which is one that I ask virtually everybody who's on the podcast, and I'm quite curious about your answer. I'm curious about everybody's answer, but as somebody who's been in it, right? Like you were in the conventional medical system, you said, for around 20 years, and now you've been kind of doing your own thing from different angles. You've been in this wellness world. So, in your opinion and your experience, what do you think it actually takes to be a successful practitioner?
Oh, a successful. Well, interesting, because I never really thought of myself as a practitioner, though I have been told that, yeah, I have been told that maybe I am. But I think to be a successful practitioner, I just personally think that there's things that are just basic. I mean, that's really how I've really created a lot of my protocols. Basic things, for example, learning how to purify your water. Clean water is so foundational to good health. So I just think that everybody could benefit from that. I won't bring the full example, but there was a doctor that I worked with who was sick, and she could not solve her problem, and she was always telling me how great of a doctor she was. And ultimately, just clean water. She didn't want to change her diet. She didn't want to do a lot of things because she had her own beliefs.
Hmm.
And she was one of those big meat eaters. I eat, almost nothing but meat. And I'm like, okay, I won't argue with you on these things. But she did do clean water and the clean hydrogen, and it did solve her issue that she had had for years and couldn't resolve. And so she was pretty blown away by that. And eventually we found out that there was stuff in her water. Her water was pretty bad. And the hydrogen machine actually exposed that. It was really funny how it did that, but the hydrogen machine sometimes exposes impurities within the water. So I find that kind of interesting. So I think to be a good practitioner, you have to understand water. I just think that everybody needs clean water. And based on what's in our water, which is really nasty, even if you filter it, I just think it's a source of a lot of issues. That's just my own opinion. I think that the other thing is, as a practitioner, if you want to call it that, obviously I think you have to care. You have to have your heart in it. I mean, your heart has to be in it. If my heart's not in something, I'm just never that good at it. I have to care like a ton in order to really get, to that next level. And I think also literally hydrogen. I think hydrogen is foundational to health, just like oxygen is foundational. The good news is that we have oxygen in our environment, but you don't really have hydrogen floating around in the air. And that's kind of a quote unquote fundamental issue, which is why we have to supplement it. Kind of like vitamin D. There's vitamin D is not in a lot of foods, and you
Hmm.
typically are going to want to supplement that to some extent. And so I think just understanding those foundational pieces, and the other foundational piece is actually overcoming what I would call nutritional deficiencies. Um, that's an important one. And so to me, those are just kind of some basic things. And I'm really big on parasites and keeping the temple clean and doing a lot of that. And then of course there's a bunch of other things you can do, but I'm not sure if that totally answers
Hmm.
your question because I'm
It
not
does.
really Oh, it does? Okay.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
I'm not really I don't have I'm not a practitioner. I don't have a hospital or a clinic where people, though people call me all the
No.
time, but that's not necessarily what I do. Nor is it what I thought I would end up doing. And I can't believe that this is what I'm
Mm,
doing these days. And the things that I know and understand still boggle my mind. And I attribute a lot of that to the universe answering my prayers. And I attribute a lot of that
mhm.
to hydrogen. I feel that hydrogen it's done something to me. I'm not going to try to make any claims of what it's done, but it's
Yeah.
changed me.
I really appreciate that, and I'm very grateful for this conversation. Very incredibly enlightening, and lots of super valuable information. So thank you very much for your time.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure talking to you, Jess. Anytime you want to do it
Yeah.
again, just let me know.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you kindly.
You know,